Welcome back to the VybeShift Podcast. I want to begin today's conversation with a question that might feel surprisingly personal. Have you ever reached the end of an incredibly productive day, one where you answered emails, attended meetings, completed the projects, took care of the family, crossed things off your to-do list, and maybe even squeezed in a workout, only to sit down in the quietness of the evening and think, why doesn't any of this feel like it matters? Not because you failed, not because you're unproductive, not because you're ungrateful for the life you built, but because somewhere beneath all of the motion, there's a strange emptiness that productivity can no longer cover. If you've experienced that, I want you to know something. You're not alone. In fact, I believe that this is becoming one of the defining experiences of modern life, especially among high-performing professionals. We have become remarkably good at doing, remarkably good at achieving, remarkably good at managing complexity. And yet, quietly, many of us have begun losing touch with something far more important than efficiency. We've begun losing touch with meaning. Today, I don't want to tell you what should matter. I don't believe anyone else can answer that question for you. Instead, I want us to become curious about something deeper. How is it possible to become so successful at living while simultaneously becoming disconnected from the experience of being alive? Because I don't think this happens overnight. I think it happens so gradually that we often don't notice it until we find ourselves standing in the middle of a life we worked incredibly hard to build, wondering why it no longer feels like home. The quiet drift. Most of us imagine that if we ever lost our sense of direction, it would be dramatic. We imagine some catastrophic event, a divorce, a loss of career, a financial collapse, a health crisis, something obvious. But in my experience, that's rarely how it happens. Meaning doesn't usually disappear in a single moment. It erodes quietly, almost invisibly. Not because we're making terrible decisions, but because we're making unconscious ones. Think back to when you were younger. There were probably things that fascinated you. Things you could spend hours doing without anyone asking you to. You were curious, present, absorbed. Time seemed to disappear because you weren't measuring your life by productivity. You were simply immersed in the experience. Then life began asking more of you. School, career, relationships, bills, children, mortgages, deadlines, performance reviews, promotions, responsibilities. None of those things are inherently wrong. In many ways, they are beautiful expressions of a meaningful life. The problem isn't responsibility. The problem is what quietly happens when responsibility becomes the only lens through which we experience ourselves. Because when every day becomes about what must be done, we slowly stop asking what brings us alive. The success we never question. Here's something I've been reflecting on recently. Most of us spend years chasing goals we never actually chose. That statement may sound strange at first. After all, you might say, of course I chose my career. Of course I chose my lifestyle. Of course I chose my ambitions. Did you? Or did you inherit many of them without ever realizing it? Think about the messages most of us absorbed growing up. Be productive. Work harder, stay busy, don't waste time, get ahead, be responsible, provide for others, keep achieving. Again, none of those are bad values. Many are incredibly noble. But somewhere along the way, something subtle happened. Achievement quietly became confused with worth. Productivity became confused with purpose. Busyness became confused with significance. And because everyone around us seemed to be running the same race, we rarely stopped to ask where the race was actually leading. Imagine boarding a train. Everyone else is getting on. Everyone appears confident. The train is moving quickly, so you assume it must be heading somewhere important. Hours pass. Days pass. Years pass. Eventually, you look at out the window and realize you never asked where the train was going. The realization isn't failure, it's awakening. Living a borrowed life. One of the most profound insights I've ever encountered is this. Many people are living lives assembled from other people's expectations. Think about that for a moment. How many of your daily decisions originate from genuine inner clarity? And how many originate from habit, fear, social expectation, professional culture, or simply momentum? Momentum is powerful enough to carry us for decades. You wake up because the alarm goes off. You go to work because that's what Monday requires. You answer emails because that's what professionals do. You attend meetings because they are scheduled. You completed tasks because they are waiting. You come home exhausted. You watch something to decompress. You fall asleep. Then tomorrow begins. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with routines, but routines can become dangerous when they replace awareness, because eventually we stop living consciously. We begin living automatically. And automatic living has a peculiar side effect. It slowly disconnects us from ourselves. The cost of constant reaction. Let's explore something that many of us never notice. Throughout the day, how much of your attention is actually yours? Before you even finish your first cup of coffee, notifications begin arriving. Someone needs something. An email requires a response. A text asks for your attention. News headlines compete for your emotional energy. Social media invites comparison. Meetings dictate your schedule. Deadlines dictate your priorities. Unexpected problems redirect your focus. By the end of the day, you've spent hours responding. But here's the question. When was the last time you simply paused long enough to ask, what do I want to give my attention to today? Not what demands it, not what screams the loudest, not what's most urgent. What is actually worthy of your life? Those are profoundly different questions, because attention is more than focus. Attention is your life unfolding in real time. Where your attention goes, your experience flows. And if your attention is constantly being claimed by everything around you, it's understandable that life eventually begins feeling fragmented. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your awareness has become outsourced. The difference between a full life and a filled life. There is a distinction that has become increasingly meaningful to me. A life can be full, or it can simply be filled. At first glance, they look identical. Both calendars are busy. Both people are accomplishing things. Both appear successful from the outside, but internally, they are living very different realities. A filled life is occupied. Every space is consumed. Every moment has a purpose assigned to it. There is little room for silence, little room for wondering, little room for simply being. A full life, however, is something else entirely. It includes meaningful work, meaningful relationships, meaningful rest, meaningful solitude, meaningful play, meaningful reflection. Notice something different? The fullness doesn't come from how much is happening. It comes from the quality of your relationship with what is happening. That is an entirely different way of living. Perhaps this isn't burnout. When people begin saying things like nothing feels important anymore, the immediate assumption is often burnout. And sometimes that's true. Physical exhaustion is real. Emotional depletion is real. But I wonder if there's another possibility. What if what you're experiencing isn't simply burnout? What if it's awareness beginning to interrupt unconscious momentum? What if it's the quiet discomfort isn't evidence that your life is falling apart, but evidence that something deeper within you has finally become unwilling to continue living on autopilot? Because awareness often arrives disguised as dissatisfaction, not because it wants to make you miserable, but because it refuses to let you settle for a life that no longer reflects who you're becoming. Maybe this isn't the end of meaning. Maybe it's the end of borrowed meaning, and there's a profound difference between these two experiences. Closing reflection for part 1. As we bring the first part of our conversation to a close, I'd like to leave you with something to quietly carry throughout your day. What if the feeling that nothing matters anymore isn't asking you to do more, or fix more, or achieve more? What if it's simply inviting you to become curious again? Curious about what genuinely brings you alive. Curious about where your attention has been going. Curious about whether you've been living from conscious choice or unconscious momentum. You don't have to answer those questions today. In fact, don't rush to answer them. Just let them accompany you. Because sometimes the most transformational moments in our lives don't begin with finding the right answers. They begin with finally asking the right questions. And in part 2, we're going to explore one of the deepest questions we can ask. How do we rediscover what truly matters after years of living what mattered to everyone else? I'll meet you there. Returning to the conversation. Welcome back. Before we begin, I want to invite you to resist a very natural temptation. As you've been listening, you may have found yourself trying to diagnose your life. Perhaps you've even been mentally making a list. Maybe I need a different job. Maybe I need to move. Maybe I need to change my schedule. Maybe I need a vacation. Those may or may not be true. But I want to gently suggest something that has become increasingly clear to me. The deepest transformation in our lives rarely begin by changing our circumstances. They begin by changing our relationship to our circumstances. That distinction matters. Because if our relationship remains unchanged, we have an uncanny ability to recreate the same experience in a different environment. We can change jobs and still feel empty. We can move to another city and still feel disconnected. We can earn more money and still wonder why fulfillment remains just out of reach. We can finally reach the promotion we've been chasing for years, stand at the top of the mountain and quietly ask ourselves, is this really all there is? The question isn't evidence that you failed, it's evidence that your soul has begun asking questions your resume cannot answer. The life between the milestones. One of the greatest illusions we inherit is that life exists primarily in the milestones. Graduation, marriage, the promotion, buying the house, paying off debt, retirement. We become conditioned to believe that life is something we eventually arrive at. So we spend years racing towards the next achievement. And when we reach it, there's a brief emotional high, a moment of satisfaction, perhaps even celebration. But then something interesting happens. Life quietly returns to ordinary Tuesday morning. The dishes still need to be washed. Emails continue arriving. The laundry doesn't care that you achieved your dream. Traffic still exists. Life continues, which means something profound. Most of our lives are not actually lived in the milestones. They're lived between them. Yet many of us have unknowingly postponed our experience of being fully alive until some future event finally gives us permission. I'll slow down after this project. I'll reconnect with myself after this busy season. I'll spend more time with my family after I get promoted. I'll start enjoying life when things settle down. But life has a funny way of replacing one season with another. The project ends, another begins. A responsibility leaves, 3 more arrive. If we're always waiting for life to become less demanding before we begin living consciously, we may wait our entire lives. The difference between existing and experiencing. This has become one of the foundational ideas beneath everything we've explored here on the VybeShift Podcast. There's a profound difference between existing and experiencing. Most of us know how to exist. We survive, we perform, we adapt, we solve problems, we're incredibly capable. But somewhere along the way, many of us stop experiencing our own lives. Think about your last meal. Did you actually taste it? Or were you answering emails, watching television, scrolling your phone, planning tomorrow? Think about your last conversation with someone you love. Were you completely present? Or were you already thinking about what you needed to happen next? Think about the drive home from work. Can you remember the journey? Or do you simply remember arriving? It is entirely possible to move through an entire day physically present while mentally living somewhere else. Not because anything is wrong with us, but because our attention has become fragmented. And fragmented attention creates fragmented lives. When that becomes our normal way of existing, meaning doesn't disappear before life has become meaningless. Meaning disappears because we no longer are fully participating in our own experience. When attention becomes currency. Imagine that every morning someone deposited 24 hours in your account. Not money, attention. Because that really is what time is. It's attention given duration. Every moment you spend worrying, you invest attention. Every moment you spend comparing yourself to someone else, you invest attention. Every notification, every argument replayed in your mind, every imagined future, every regret from the past, attention. Now imagine reviewing your investment portfolio at the end of the day. Where did your attention actually go? Not where you intended it to go, where did it truly go? How much of it was invested in fear? How much in obligation? How much in proving yourself? How much in simply reacting? How much was invested in wonder, connection, gratitude, presence, curiosity, love? This isn't about judgment. It's about awareness. Because where your attention consistently goes, your life quietly follows. Many of us don't need more time. We need different relationship with the time we already have. The fear beneath constant busyness. I'd like to explore something we don't often discuss. Sometimes we stay busy because busyness protects us, not physically, psychologically. Silence has a way of introducing questions we've been avoiding. Questions like, am I actually happy? Who am I becoming? Do I even enjoy the life I've created? What if I've been climbing the wrong mountain? These questions can feel unsettling. So we keep moving. We keep accomplishing. We keep filling every available space because motion creates the comforting illusion that progress is automatically occurring. But movement and direction are not the same thing. You can spend years becoming increasingly efficient while simultaneously moving farther away from yourself. That isn't failure. It's simply something many of us were never taught to notice. Rediscovering wonder. Children have an extraordinary capacity for wonder. A butterfly can stop their entire day. A puddle becomes an adventure. A sunset isn't something to photograph, it's something to experience. Then adulthood arrives. Schedules replace spontaneity. Efficiency replaces curiosity. Optimization replaces awe. Somewhere along the way, we begin measuring every activity by one question. What does it accomplish? It sounds responsible, but there's another question we slowly stop asking. What allows me to feel deeply alive? Notice how different those questions are. One asks about production. The other asks about presence. One builds careers. The others build lives. Healthy living requires both. But many high performers become exceptionally skilled at the very first one while quietly starving the second. What truly matters cannot be borrowed. One of the most liberating realizations I've ever had is this. No one else can tell you what should matter most in your life. Not your parents, not your employer, not society, not social media, not even this podcast. Other people can inspire you, teach you, challenge you, offer perspective, but meaning is never successfully outsourced. It has to be discovered, lived, experienced. That discovery often begins with very small moments, not dramatic reinventions, not selling everything and moving across the country, simply noticing. What conversations leave you energized? Which relationships allow you to become more fully yourself? When do you feel most present? What activities make time disappear? What environments allow you to breathe more deeply? Those aren't trivial questions. They're clues. Clues leading you back toward yourself. An awareness practice. I'd like to leave you with a simple practice over the next few days. Don't try to reorganize your entire life. Don't create another complicated system. Instead, become an observer. Several times each day, simply pause for 30 seconds and ask yourself, where is my attention right now? Then ask, did I choose to place it here, or did something else choose it for me? That's all. No judgment, no fixing, just noticing. Because awareness has a remarkable quality. What we consistently observe begins to change naturally. Not because we force it, but because consciousness itself transforms the way we relate to our experience. And perhaps that's where rediscovering what matters begins. Not by chasing meaning, but by becoming fully present for the life that's already unfolding around us. Transition to part 3. In the final part of our conversation, we're going to bring all of this together. We'll explore why discovering what truly matters isn't about creating a brand new life. It's about returning to the deepest part of yourself that has been patiently waiting beneath years of expectations, responsibilities, and unconscious momentum. Because perhaps the life that you've been searching for isn't somewhere out there. Perhaps it's quietly waiting for you right here. Returning home. As we come into the final part of our discussion together, I'd like you to set aside, just for these next few moments, the temptation to solve anything. You don't need to have your 5-year plan figured out. You don't need to know whether you're in the right career. You don't need to decide whether you should make a major life change. Those questions have their place, but they are not the deepest questions. Because before we ask, what should I do, we need to rediscover who is the one doing it. And that is a very different conversation. Throughout this episode, we've explored what it feels like to slowly lose our sense of meaning, not through catastrophe, but through accumulation. One responsibility, one expectation, one obligation, one achievement after another, until we become so accustomed to carrying life that we forgot how to experience it. But I want to offer you something that has become one of the foundational realizations in my own life. I don't believe meaning is something we create. I believe meaning is something we uncover. What if nothing has been lost? Think about that for a moment. When people say, I don't know what matters anymore, the assumption is that meaning has disappeared. But what if that isn't true? Imagine standing in front of a beautiful mountain landscape. Now imagine that a dense fog rolls in. The mountain hasn't disappeared. Your ability to see it has. Meaning may be much the same. Life doesn't necessarily become meaningless. Our awareness simply becomes obscured. Obscured by speed. Obscured by pressure. Obscured by comparison. Obscured by endless distraction. Obscured by believing that our worth depends upon how much we accomplish. The mountain is still there, and perhaps what you're longing for isn't a new mountain. Perhaps you're simply longing for the fog to lift. That possibility changes everything, because if meaning hasn't actually been lost, then your task isn't to manufacture it. Your task is to remove what has been covering it. The courage to become honest. There comes a point in every person's life where honesty becomes more valuable than certainty. Not honesty with other people, honesty with ourselves. Questions like, am I living in alignment with what I truly value? Or have I simply become very good at meeting expectations? Am I building a life that looks successful, or a life that actually feels deeply alive? Those are uncomfortable questions because they don't allow us to hide behind accomplishments. Our culture celebrates visible success. It rarely celebrates invisible alignment. No one gives you an award because you chose presence over performance. No one applauds you because you spent an uninterrupted hour with someone you love. No one posts on social media because they sat quietly watching a sunset, and yet those moments often become the ones we remember decades later. Not because they were productive, but because they were real. Life is always asking one question. I've come to believe that beneath all of our daily experiences, life quietly asks us the same question over and over again. Are you here? Not physically, consciously. Are you here for this conversation? Are you here for this meal? Are you here while your child is telling you about their day? Are you here while your spouse is speaking? Are you here while walking through a forest? Are you here while drinking your morning coffee? Because if we're honest, many of us are somewhere else. We're replaying yesterday, preparing for tomorrow, managing possibilities, solving imaginary problems, living inside our minds while life patiently unfolds right in front of us. Perhaps that's why meaning begins fading. Not because life has become empty, but because we've stopped inhabiting it. The measure of a life. Our culture tends to measure life by accumulation. How much did you earn? How much did you own? How much did you accomplish? How many followers? How many promotions? How many awards? Those measurements have their place, but imagine reaching the end of your life. Do you think your first thought would be, I wish I had answered 3 more emails? Probably not. Perhaps instead you'll remember the laughter around the dinner table, the morning you watched the sunrise over the water, an unexpected conversation with a stranger that changed your perspective, holding your child's hand, sitting beside someone you love during a difficult season, walking through the woods after the rain, swimming across a quiet lake, looking into someone's eyes and realizing they felt seen because you were completely present. Those moments rarely make headlines, but they become the architecture of a meaningful life. Not because they were extraordinary, because you were fully there. Perhaps meaning is simpler than we imagine. I wonder if we've complicated meaning. We search for some grand purpose, some dramatic calling, some life-defining mission. And while these things certainly exist for some people, perhaps meaning is often much quieter. Perhaps meaning lives inside ordinary moments that receive extraordinary attention. Perhaps it lives in how we greet the cashier, how we listen without interrupting, how we notice beauty instead of rushing past it, how we become fully present with our own lives. Meaning may not be hiding in some future achievement. It may be patiently waiting inside this very moment. If only we could slow down long enough to recognize it. The invitation. So where do we go from here? Not toward another checklist, not toward another productivity system, not toward another attempt to optimize every minute of our lives. Instead, I would invite you into something much simpler. This week, notice. Notice what gives you energy. Notice what quietly drains it. Notice when your attention feels scattered. Notice when you feel deeply present. Notice the conversations that leave you feeling more like yourself. Notice the environments where your shoulders relax without you realizing it. Notice what evokes gratitude instead of obligation. Notice what awakens wonder instead of worry. Don't analyze these moments. Don't immediately try to improve them. Simply notice. Because awareness has an extraordinary way of revealing what force never can. And perhaps little by little, you begin recognizing what truly matters has been speaking to you all along. Not through urgency, but through quiet consistency. Maybe the deeper question is, what part of me have I stopped listening to? Because beneath every expectation, beneath every title, beneath every achievement, beneath every role you play, there is still the quiet awareness that has been with you your entire life. It has watched every success, every disappointment, every transition, every beginning, every ending. It has never demanded that you become someone else. It was simply waiting, patiently, for you to return. And perhaps that's what the season of your life is really about. Not becoming someone new, but remembering the person you've been underneath all the noise. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If today's conversation resonated with you, I hope you'll carry one simple question into the week ahead. Am I giving my life to what is merely urgent or what is genuinely meaningful? Until next time, keep observing, keep questioning, keep becoming aware, and above all, keep shifting. If today's episode helped you recognize the experience of feeling disconnected from what truly matters, I want to personally invite you to continue this week's journey on the Vybrational Stage Podcast. On VybeShift, our purpose is recognition. We slow down just enough to notice the patterns, assumptions, and habits that quietly shape our everyday lives. Recognition is powerful, but we cannot change what we cannot first see. But recognition is only the beginning. This week's Vybrational Stage Podcast asks an even deeper question. If I don't know what matters anymore, what taught me what was supposed to matter in the first place? Together we'll explore how our identities are quietly formed by culture, achievement, family expectations, professional success, and the stories we've inherited about what matters or what makes life meaningful. And we'll discover that beneath all of those layers is something that has never been lost. Our capacity to experience life directly before it becomes filtered through obligation, performance, and comparison. This isn't a conversation about fixing your life. It's a conversation about rediscovering the awareness from which an authentic life naturally emerges. 2 podcasts, 1 transformational journey. People often ask why there are 2 podcasts. The answer is simple. The VybeShift Podcast is where we recognize the hidden patterns that shape our lives. These episodes are practical, relatable, and grounded in the experience we all share. They help us see ourselves more clearly so that we can begin making conscious choices rather than simply reacting to life. The Vybrational Stage Podcast takes that same recognition and journeys deeper into the natural awareness itself. There we explore the foundations beneath our thoughts, our identities, our beliefs, and our experience of being human. It is less about solving problems and more about transforming the relationship we have with ourselves. Think about the VybeShift Podcast as opening the door. The Vybrational Stage Podcast invites you to walk through it. Together, they form one continuous journey, from recognition to realization, from awareness to transformation. Continue the journey. If you're ready to continue exploring this week's core problem at a deeper level, I'd love to have you join me on the Vybrational Stage Podcast. The conversation continues there. The awareness deepens there. And together, we'll continue discovering that perhaps what matters most has never been missing. It has simply been waiting to be recognized. Continue the journey by following the link in the show notes, and I'll see you there.